Hey, I'm Simona Costantini, and I'm obsessed with helping you heal, connect to your purpose, and teaching you about all things mindset. I realized I deserved and wanted more from this crazy little thing called life, so I changed my beliefs, healed my hurt, and made it my mission to help you do the same. I'm a recovering people pleaser turned life coach and podcast producer. I teach busy business owners how to fall in love with their life and business and live it on their terms. On this show, you get everything raw and real, from inspirational guest interviews to deep dives into topics like life, relationships, business, purpose, growth, and mindset. I lay it all on the line every time. Think of this as your one-stop shop to help you live a more purposeful and inspired life. This is the Happiness Happens podcast. Are you ready to hear this inspiring conversation? Let's dive on in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode on the Happiness Happens podcast. I'm very excited to bring you this conversation today and share about our guest. Her name is Vrin Rao, and she is an Enneagram coach and a meditation teacher. She specializes in working with women to help them develop stronger relationships with themselves and with others through uncovering their unique underlying motivations, fears, and needs using the personality framework of the Enneagram. This is our first conversation about the Enneagram on the podcast, which is kind of crazy to me because I feel like we should have had this conversation so long ago, but I believe in timing, and timing is everything. And Vrin was just absolutely lovely to chat with. I'm so excited for you to dive into this conversation because there's so much wisdom that you can pull out of here. It's a balance between Enneagram through a spiritual lens, but also through just the personality types, and she goes into the different types. So it's very, very interesting. And I know you're going to learn a lot from this episode. I also just wanted to invite you to leave a review of the show if you're listening on Apple Podcast. I would be so grateful, as well as reviewing the show and leaving it a lovely 5 stars. It helps other people see and hear about this content and these episodes so that they can have access to all of this incredible wisdom and information as well. And before we dive into this conversation, I also wanted to extend the invite for you to join my private Facebook community. It's called Happiness Happens Today Community, and it's for entrepreneurs. It's about life, mindset, business, and you'll learn so many different tips and tricks. We also dive into some spirituality, some energy. I do oracle card readings in there. I do live trainings every Tuesday night on different topics, ranging from how to stay in alignment all the way to how to plan your goals for the year. So it's an all-encompassing group that is just filled with incredible members. So I'm extending the invite. The link is in the show notes. And the last thing that I wanted to share with you is that I started a new morning motivational series that's called Align Your Mind. And I started this week that just passed, and I'm posting all of the replays on my YouTube channel. It's also in my Facebook group, and it's also on my Instagram page, so be sure to catch those. Those happen at 9 a.m. Eastern time every single day, Monday to Friday, and the conversations have been epic. There have been so many massive topics and breakthroughs and conversations. So join in on the conversation, join in on the fun, and I look forward to seeing you there. So without further ado, let's dive into this week's conversation. Okay, Vrin, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation with you, and I'm so excited to get to know you more. Can you just start off by telling us a little bit about the journey that's brought you to here and to where you are today?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be with you. My journey has been very unexpected. I'll start off by saying that my background is actually biochem. I have my bachelor's and my master's in biochem, and master's U of T. So spent quite a few years, that's right, quite a few years studying and just being in that scientific space and absorbing that kind of academic energy, really. And in between my bachelor's and my master's, I had an opportunity to go and delve deeper into the tradition I was born into. And that tradition is known as Bhakti Yoga, or the yoga of love and devotion.
Oh.
Yeah. And so I did that for about a year and a half, and it really shifted my life in a way that was really unexpected. And it's really guided the trajectory of my life as I look back and kind of see what's unfolded. But after my master's, I really wanted a return on investment. I knew that science wasn't where I wanted to live, and it wasn't the area I wanted to play in, but I felt like I invested so much. I wanted to contribute and also give something back, and get something back. And so I dabbled a little bit in teaching. I was working for the Canadian government, regulating natural health products for a while, and worked on the opposite side, worked for companies. And then I ended up meeting my husband, who lives in New York. And when the move was pending, I felt like, okay, perhaps this is a good time to really see what I'm supposed to do and how I'm supposed to serve in this world. And I fell into coaching, to be perfectly honest. There was no predetermined plan. I had no idea what coaching was about. And I took a certification because I felt like, yeah, always good to have more tools in your toolkit. I love people, always felt like I wanted to help in some way, but no idea where to start. And I walked into my coaching certification and I had that, oh no moment. And I say, oh no, because my husband was just starting off as an entrepreneur at the same time. And here I am going like, me too. I'd also like to. And anyways, he's been incredibly supportive. But yeah, that was kind of like the Cliff Notes version of kind of where I got to today. And then meditation has always been a part of my life, and just investing more in that. And it's kind of come naturally together.
That's so beautiful. And today we're going to talk a lot about the Enneagram. And so I know in your coaching, you use the framework of the Enneagram in a lot of what you do. Could you sort of give everyone a little bit of an idea of what exactly like the Enneagram system is, and how it works? Because I know about it, but I don't know the intricacies and how they sort of play out into your everything, into your personality and relationships and all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I felt the same way when I first was introduced to the Enneagram. I was like, oh, cool, personality like quiz or typology. But having really delved deeper into it, I realized it's so much more. And so really what the Enneagram is it's a framework, it's a system. It's not necessarily a test, as you probably know. It's a self-discovery process. And what it speaks to is that there are 9 different really ego lenses that we all have within us, and that we have very deep motivations that come with a particular lens. And so we all know what the ego is. We experience it from other people, and perhaps we even experience it within ourselves. But just to delve into it a little bit more, the ego is really a collection of identities that we hold near and dear. And when one of those identities becomes triggered, and the ego goes like flashing neon lights, oh my God, you're not being seen the way you want to be seen, then we resort to different kind of coping mechanisms to get what we want. And when we do end up being seen the way we want to be seen, we're kind of like, oh my God, okay, I can relax now.
Yeah.
Right. And so what the Enneagram really speaks to is that it gives more insight and illumination into the particular lens by which our ego sees the world. So we get a deeper understanding as to why we're processing and internalizing certain actions, words, occurrences that are coming at us constantly, and how our ego interprets that.
Very, very cool. And so if everyone has all of these 9 types within them, why is it that some people lean towards being stronger types of one specific type? Does that make any sense?
Totally. So with every type comes a particular motivation. So you can also think of it as we carry these 9 motivations or drivers within us. And there's one particular motivation that drives us more than the rest. That's really it. It's not that the others don't exist, but there's one that pushes us more than the rest. And from the research that's been done, you're born with that motivation. You come into this world with that motivation and with that driver. And so there is a huge nurture element to this as well. And so for some people, you can really feel confused, and we've all experienced that. You're born into a family, or you're within a society, and you feel like, God, like I feel like I can't be me, or like I don't resonate with this. And what's actually happening is perhaps the culture of the family or the society you live in is different from the way that you're primarily driven.
That's really, really interesting. And so where can people go to sort of find like their Enneagram type, or like discover what theirs might be?
So there's a lot of reading material out there. The Bible, I guess you can say, that I recommend in terms of the Enneagram, if somebody would like to read and just understand more, is The Wisdom of the Enneagram by Don Riso and Russ Hudson. It's a very heavy book. I'll also warn people about that. It's not like a light read. You're gonna like, it's intense. It's definitely intense. There are also some other very informative books that have been written beautifully. One is called The Road Back to You, by Ian Morgan Crone and Susan Stabile. But to be honest, what I found is that the best way to really find out your type is to go through an actual Enneagram workshop.
Oh.
Because you get a flavor for the different energies of each of the types. And if that's not possible, then to have an Enneagram consultation. So that's something that I do, where I work one-on-one with people, couples, groups, whatever it is. And it's a lot of deep questioning to find out what is the motivation that's actually driving your behavior. And that's really what differentiates the Enneagram from other personality typologies. It's not talking, or it's not focusing on behavior, it's focusing on the motivation.
Ooh, I really, really like that you said that. When you say focusing on the motivation, like, do you mean like the specific characteristics of the Enneagram type that you would relate most to?
Yes, exactly. So each type has a very, very specific motivation. So I'll give some examples. For one type, the motivation, and you'll see that we have all of these within us, is to feel loved and to feel connected,
Ooh.
right? For another, it is to feel secure and to feel supported. And for another one, it could be to feel worthy and to feel valuable. And so those are just three. And you can see even with those, like, oh yeah, I see a bit of myself in this and
totally.
this.
I'm like, right? Yes, I have all three.
Right. Of
very,
course.
very cool. Can I ask what your type is?
Sure. So the primary motivation that really drives me is the motivation of feeling valuable, of feeling worthy. And to be, when you really, I guess you can say, discover the box that we've kind of put ourselves in, right? What we start to recognize, what I've recognized, is this motivation shows up in micro behaviors that I exhibit. It's amazing. So I can give an example if that's helpful. Yes. So I was speaking to my husband about this. This was like a big revelation to me about a couple of months back. I said, I actually unconsciously monitor how much time in a conversation I'm having with somebody that they're speaking and that I'm speaking. And somehow there is this unconscious like equation that's built that if somebody speaks more, they're more valuable than I am.
Oh, that's very interesting.
So it can happen depending on the motivation in different ways for each person. Mm-hmm. But for somebody who's the same type as me, they might be like, yep, I can relate to that.
Can I ask what number that is?
Yeah, that's called the achiever, or the type 3.
Okay. It makes a lot of sense because I'm also a 3 with a little bit of 4. So I'm like, I'm really feeling this right now. I'm like, I'm wondering, I wonder why this is, resonating so hard right now.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like the veil is just like totally pulled like away, and you're like, oh God, I feel so exposed, And similarly, it's so funny, like just to riff off of the fact that we're both 3s, that for many threes, you'll ask them, like, when you were little, did you ever imagine you were a podium or you were on a stage or on a tennis court or wherever, and people were just like clapping for you, and everyone's like, yep, that's me, right? And amazing. And you'll ask somebody else who may be of another type, and they'll be like, oh my God, like, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And but if you were to look at just the behavior, in many ways, it's actually very superficial. But if you go down to see why, like, why did you want to be on stage? Why did you want the applause? It's to feel worthy, because I don't see my own value. I need mirrors. I need other people to actually tell me I'm valuable.
I love that so much. I love that you said mirrors, because I really think, a little bit off topic, but I really think that people are mirrors for us. And what we get triggered in other people are things that we need to heal or want to heal within us, or, things that make us, you know, something we love about somebody else or whatever. Like, that's an equal reflection back of something that you probably, without realizing it, love about yourself, right? Without, maybe you don't even realize that. So I think it's just really, really interesting. And I like this, like, tool and technique as, a lens through which you can see something different. Because I'll be honest, like, I'm a pretty spiritual person. And so I always thought that the Enneagram was more, but here's where my mind gets confusing, because I love the psychology background to everything. I love positive psychology. I love the principles and the theories, right? But then when I think about, everything else, I have this whole spiritual lens. So I'm like, I struggle blending the two. And so Enneagram, I always thought that it was this, I thought it was always more just like based in fact and science. And I was like, I don't know why I thought that. And it might be true, it might not, because I really don't know enough about it to say. But so I just find that piece really interesting. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm so glad that you brought that up. And it's amazing, actually, because the Enneagram is actually kind of like a doorway or a gate to spirituality.
Really?
Yes. And the reason for that is, if you think about it, the ego, so we all have spirit within us, right? And spirit is pure. And so the yoga text, for example, actually describes the spirit, the soul, as full of eternality, full of bliss, and full of knowledge. And each and every one of us have that. But we're covered by so much, right? We're covered by the fact that we have this vehicle of the body. We're covered by certain psychophysical conditioning, like the mind, a very particular ego, all of these things.
Yeah.
And what the ego does is that it actually detracts us from being able to come in tune with spirit. Right? Because what it does is it's hanging on to identities that are actually reflections and that are rooted in this physical body, not in spirit.
Ooh. Can you go like a little bit deeper with that and just explain a little bit more on that topic? I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So
Take it away.
So for example, let's use this lens of feeling valuable or worthy, right? That motivation. What that can do is it can potentially make us very attached to looking and being perceived as successful, as smart, as very valuable, as so many things, right? As being an expert, right? And what that does is, if we go deeper, that's associated with being in this incarnation of this body. It's not actually being associated with the soul, because the soul doesn't have anything to prove. It's right? True. Whereas the ego has everything to prove.
Absolutely.
And so what really the beauty of the Enneagram is to recognize that, wow, this is the ego conditioning that I have. And then as I start to grow and evolve in my levels of awareness and my levels of consciousness, at a certain point, I start to realize, in order to truly be able to be in touch and in alignment with the soul or with spirit, I need to actually let go of the ego.
Ooh, yes. I love that. I love that so much. And so, how can someone start to do that once they know their Enneagram type? And then the specific drivers that may be attached to that, or the specific um, ego triggers, if you will.
Mm.
How do people start to shift that? Um,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
No. Okay.
Yes. So the first place I would actually look at is, even irrespective of type, one of the most important pieces to the Enneagram is, where are you on any average moment in your day? Like, what level of consciousness are you at? What level of awareness? And to determine that first, right? And so the Enneagram can be really helpful because there may be certain ways in which we show up that indicate, wow, maybe I'm at an average level of consciousness, or maybe I'm actually at a much higher level of consciousness. And when we are able to identify where we're at on the spectrum of consciousness on average, then we actually know how much work we have to do.
Hmm.
It's hard to know how much work is ahead if you don't know where you're at the beginning,
That's a really good point.
right?
That's a really good point. And how would someone be able to assess where they are in terms of where they are consciously?
So if you were to break up the spectrum of consciousness, I mean, it could be broken up in thousands of
Like
pieces,
so
but just,
many.
right, just so many, but just for the sake of, simplicity, as extremely high level, healthy level of awareness, controlling or average level of awareness, and unhealthy or destructive level of awareness. Most people are hovering around average. And the characteristics that you see around the average levels of consciousness is that I'm trying to control and manipulate my environment so that I'm being seen the way that I think I should be seen.
Hmm.
So we were talking about the three. Now, if we used another type for an example, so the type 9, the motivation for the 9 is to really feel harmonious, to feel peaceful. They really prefer to avoid conflict. Now, at very, very healthy levels of consciousness, the 9 can actually recognize that the only way to peace and harmony is through navigating conflict. But at a controlling level of consciousness, what they may do is that they may start to withdraw. They may start to exhibit passive aggressive behaviors because they're feeling like, wow, you're infringing on my space. And when you're infringing on me, I'm losing my sense of peace.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And so every type has these different ways in which they show up, especially when they're in the kind of controlling and average levels of consciousness. When we're really aware of that, then we have very specific and nuanced things to look out for. So it's not wishy-washy at all. It's not kind of like, oh yeah, I guess I'm kind of here. It's like, oh God, I'm doing this. Okay, I know this is where I'm at. So how do I start to take those steps to, um, work through it?
I love that so much. That's so good. It's so good. And I never would have ever imagined that all of this would have been related to the Enneagram ever. Like I never would have imagined, which is why I just think this conversation is so great.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, there's kind of been an explosion of Enneagram related content out there. I'm sure
Yeah.
you've seen that yourself, and it's amazing. It's wonderful. The more that people know about this incredible tool, it's powerful. However, I feel like with popularity comes kind of like a dilution
Yes.
of how powerful something can be, right? And then so you see like things become reduced to like behavior when the Enneagram is actually all about motivation, right? And so you immediately lose the depth and like the profundity of what it can do.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody is not necessarily open, or they're not in their journey to really explore the spiritual, then that might not be where they're using the Enneagram, or that's not a side that they're open to seeing at the moment.
That's really, really fair. That's a really good point. But I feel like it almost sort of is the most impactful when you embrace all of the sides of it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Hmm. I love
You
that.
got it. Similar to yoga, right? Like with yoga, so much has been about asana, and now more and more you see like actually yoga philosophy, it's a way of life. Asana
Yes.
is a component of it. And so similarly, the Enneagram, yeah, so powerful if you just want to use it for self-development, self-reflection, all of that. But how much more powerful is it if you can actually transcend the ego? That, I mean, wow, to be able to actually tap into our innate value and not have to prove anything.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice? No, just kidding.
Right? No, it would be, right? It'd be
It
so
would be.
freeing.
Oh, I love that. I love that because I also feel like it helps you heal like the inner conflict that goes on in your mind, and the inner voice, the inner critic, like the ego, exactly the ego that
Yeah.
goes on in your own mind. So,
Yeah. And in fact, if you think about it, the mind actually becomes, this was something very powerful that my husband was sharing with me. And I realized like, oh yeah, that's so true. The mind is really like the voice box for the ego.
the mind is really the voice box for the ego.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. He is he is deep.
He definitely is. And I thought that
Wow.
was, yeah, it's so profound. So when, if we're able to see all of the mental chatter from that light, now you have a real good lens into what your ego is actually saying. It's
Mm,
not just like mindless chatter anymore. There's a lot of information we can collect and say, oh wow, okay, I'm being triggered, that's why my mind is saying this. Or I'm leaning too much into this, like this indulgence, right there. And
mhm.
so we really have kind of a path forward.
That's really cool. I think that it's just such an interesting tool. And truthfully, like it's almost surprised me how intuitive it is. Do you know what I mean? And how like connected to your intuition it is. And, you know, it's interesting because I feel like all these tools and techniques, regardless of what it is, like there's lots of different ones that I've explored over the last year, like human design is one of them. All these different modalities, all these different healing techniques, all of that, they all have like their own purpose, but and they all have their own method and like methodology, but at the same time, like they're all rooted in the same fact of, you know, connecting back with the ego. So I think that this is really cool that this is actually more of like, can be, if you want to take this lens with it, but can be actually a more spiritual tool, which I think is so cool.
So much. In fact, Don Riso and Russ Hudson, who really are kind of like the preeminent teachers of the Enneagram, right? For them, they actually say that the whole system is for you to start your spiritual journey.
Wow.
You know, where the Enneagram ends is where spirituality begins. And it's amazing because when you want to really, and borrowing this from, you know, my own background of bhakti yoga, it's said that there's so many unwanted desires in the heart,
Hmm.
and it can be so difficult to pinpoint them. But what the Enneagram does is it actually helps you to identify those. And when you identify them, you can start to work on them.
I love
And
that.
when you work on them, then those things start to alleviate.
That's so beautiful.
And then when the heart becomes cleansed of those unwanted things, wow, then we can truly become, borrowing this phrase from an incredible bhakti mentor, we can become true spiritual warriors, because when our hearts are pure, that's when we can truly affect change. When we're not looking for validation, we're not looking for any kind of like followers or anything, but we can actually live by example. That's what it's all about, really.
That is so beautiful. By example, and then also the first word that comes to mind is by integrity, which fully is, you know, it fully comes to me because you said, you know, living your heart's true desire, like living out what you don't want to be, sort of, sorry, healing what you have in your heart that you don't necessarily want to be carrying around anymore. That allows you to live in your own integrity.
Exactly. Instead
So
of being
beautiful.
pushed into actions and thoughts and behaviors that we later on look back and like, why am I doing that? Like, I know this is counterproductive, and yet I'm impelled. And how do I prevent that? Well, by being able to shine a lens on it, then it just becomes so much easier when you know what you're dealing with.
I love that. I love this concept. I think I'm gonna have to go back, take my Enneagram test again, because I'm pretty sure I'm a 3 with a bit of a 4. But I mean, I guess I have all of them. But yeah, I'm just like, I'm so inspired to learn a little bit more about it and go a little bit more in depth. And I'm curious, how does knowing what your Enneagram type allow you to develop better relationships with yourself, but then in turn, better relationships with other people?
Oh, yeah, so much so, because once you start to recognize what your own motivation is, and if the other person also starts to recognize their motivations, and if they're different, especially when they're different, you and you're starting to build that awareness of like how you work and like why you do or say the things you're saying, and you can express that. Really, what the Enneagram does is it offers a language.
Mm.
Right? It's like, oh, I'm having this moment where I'm feeling like I'm pushing because I'm not feeling valuable, or I'm having this moment where I'm not trusting and I don't necessarily have the evidence, but I just, like, this is the way I'm conditioned. And you can actually speak it out to somebody else. It it makes it for such a rich and deep relationship and such a deep, rich conversation. And then what happens is that there's so much empathy and compassion and understanding that's really built.
I love that so much. That's beautiful. And I think that's so important, because all at the basis of every relationship is the ability to sort of like listen and understand and hear, you know what I mean? And I think the more self-awareness you have of your own self, the more you're allowed, not allowed, but the more you can expand into your relationships, because you're allowing yourself to sort of take a step back and to heal maybe all of the things that, or to notice or to be aware of all of the different things that, you may not necessarily love that you may do in a relationship, let's say. But I think this is such a cool technique, because it gives you this lens to really reflect in on yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also providing you, I mean, I was shocked at how much I knew certain things were happening, but I didn't have language to actually describe it. And when you're given language, you're not searching anymore. You're able to say things as they are.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, like you were mentioning, I really appreciated that. Yes, many times there are in relationships that I see amongst people, both partners want to hear and they want to understand. But when you don't know it yourself and you can't express it, then you're both left kind of wondering what to do.
That's so true. And then that communication line kind of gets broken, but not even intentionally. It's just that nobody knows how to fix it. And it's like, hey, like, but so I guess I'm curious too, like, if you are very aware of what your own Enneagram type is, and let's say like the partner that you have, or, a friend that you may be having conversation with, or what have you, any type of relationship, I guess, how can someone sort of sort of help others to understand, like, do you think that it's important for other people to be aware of their own Enneagram type as well, so that they can, be more understanding of like who they are as people, or like why specific things may happen? Or do you think that it's more sort of valuable, like, for you to be more aware, and then in turn, sort of like living your authenticity from the inside out? Does that question even make any sense?
Yeah, I think it
Does it?
does.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And
It
I
was a
think,
long-winded way of getting there.
no worries. I think, to me, from what I heard you say, I think it's both.
Okay.
I really
I
think
love
it's
that.
both, right? And it's helpful when the other person knows, and hopefully at a certain point, if they're not there yet, but they're building and growing to the place where they can share and just say, yeah, I'm having this moment, or this is what's going on inside of me. I'm starting to see it. And even if it's after the fact, that's okay. Like, at least that awareness is being generated. And then if somebody doesn't know their type, but perhaps you may suspect what their type may be, or you really see how perhaps there may be a bias for you if somebody doesn't see the world through the lens that you see the world, then you can really work on that yourself. And as I mentioned, if you do have a hunch how somebody else may be, you can, one of the things that I often say is, please don't try to type other people, like let them have their own self-discovery moment. Don't ruin it for them. Right. I mean, it's exciting, right? And I think for many of us, when we learn different systems, we're like kids in a candy store and we're like, ooh, like I just figured something out. Like, let me go share. Or like, you need to have a bit of this, like this candy as well.
Yeah.
But to really respect and to see that, oh, okay, I'm noticing this. One of the things you can do is ask questions, because as you ask questions, it helps the other person and it helps you.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's really, really great. And so you're actually not influencing somebody else with your own beliefs or putting your own belief system onto other people, but you're merely providing them an opportunity to open up because you may have something in mind that you think could be beneficial for them to sort of explore.
Yeah, exactly. Or perhaps even try to confirm something like, ooh, that sounds like, perhaps you have in the back of your head, like, it sounds like, you're really looking for some respect right now. Okay. So instead of saying like, oh, do you want to be respected? It's kind of like,
like,
okay,
yes, I
of
guess
course.
so.
Like, what does that mean? It's just, there's another way, you can try to phrase it. It's like, what are you looking for right now? I'm sensing there's something that you're looking for. And then it helps to prompt them. And even if they don't get to that, they've already gone deeper than where they were, a couple of seconds ago.
1,000%. I totally agree, because you've opened up a new door of like possibility that they probably never even thought, you know what I mean? They're probably like, wait, where did that question come from? Or like, what a thoughtful question or way to pose that question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you make someone stop and think, you recognize, wow, perhaps they've never even thought of it themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. I love that. And would you say that, knowing your Enneagram type allows you to become more self-empowered?
Definitely. Absolutely. You know where your blind spots are, where your shadows are, you also know your gifts, like, I mean, a lot of times, and I can be guilty of it. I focus a lot more on the shadow work because, to be honest, my tendency is to go to the gifts part, right? And so for other types, it might be like, your tendency is to go to the shadow, so you should focus on the gifts, right?
Yeah.
And so by being able to really see how I am being triggered, whether good or bad, that is empowering. Now, this is the interesting thing, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, right? That empowerment, the goal of empowerment is positive and wonderful and happy. The process to empowerment is tough and confronting, uncomfortable, and you may stop millions of times. Millions of times.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I think that's such a good point to bring up too, because I mean, my podcast is called Happiness Happens, and a lot of the feedback that I got and still kind of get sometimes is like, well, you can't just be happy all the time. And so I've always been very clear that like my intention and message with the word happiness is never to bypass all of the feelings and the emotions and the shadow work that you do, because there's always a struggle to get to where you are. It doesn't have to be like a lifelong, like long drawn out struggle, like, whatever, but sometimes it is, you know what I mean? And that's just the way that it is. And I totally agree with you that the journey to self-empowerment is through a really, often times can be a very hard path to get there. It's not an easy place to sit. And then when you sit in that place, then you constantly are having to reevaluate the shadows that appear. Because I'm sure you can maybe attest to this, but like every time you level up in some kind of form, there's a little bit of doubt that will come creeping in. You know what I mean? Every time something new happens, every time you hop on, to try a new thing, yeah, anytime you stretch, like there's always like a little bit of like, like, am I gonna be okay? You know what I mean? So it's like constant work. It never ends. Anyways, that was a bit tangent, but
yeah, no, not at all. I was thinking it's so true, whether it be happiness, whether it be empowerment, whether it be whatever, there is no end, actually.
Yes.
Like you reach a certain point or level of happiness or empowerment, and then there's the next level and the next level and the next level. So it's an ongoing journey. And to make it seem like, oh, I'm happy now, or I'm self-empowered now, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, if you really think about it, you may be for a few seconds, and then it's like, oh, okay, the next leg of the journey.
Exactly. Exactly. Like you continue to grow. And, I think that this is like a lot of like where people start to sort of sit and I think this is where it gets really important to be like, or to find like gratitude and all of the little things, the journey that's brought you to where you are, because we're so quick to always reach for the next thing, right? We're always so quick to be like, yes, yes, yes. But I think that especially with the self-empowerment piece that you were saying, you become this like new version of yourself while not forgetting the past, but evolving.
Yes. It's different incarnations. You can think of it that way, right?
Yeah.
And this piece about gratitude and really being able to see how far you've come, having mirrors in your life through coaches or therapists or friends, family, whatever it may be, is just so important.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I've started to realize is that when that kind of, you create that space for like a celebratory energy, there also needs to be some groundedness in that. Right. And I see that with my own mentors, especially spiritual mentors, that there is this, it isn't like this, yes, I did it kind of like energy. It's okay, I'm here now. I'm so grateful. I wouldn't have been able to get here without, the effort, help, support of, and that's really what's celebrated. But for it to be grounded more and more as I get older, I realize that need for groundedness is actually so important, because it cements it makes it real.
Mm-hmm.
And then it actually allows the gratitude to enter deeper into the heart, and then we don't forget it.
That is beautiful. That's so beautiful. Oh my goodness. I love this conversation so much. I'm so glad that you came on the show, but I'm not done yet. But I just wanted to tell you that I'm so glad that you came on today.
I love this conversation. So
it's so fun. It's so fun. I typically have the most amazing time every time I come on to here. And I think it's just because it's just always like, yeah, I don't know. It feeds the passion. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I would love to know, and this might take a little bit long, but so like if we can't do all of them, then that's okay. But I'd love to know for our listeners, I'm sure there's tons of people with all different Enneagram types. I'm wondering if you have like one tip for each type that they could like integrate into their lives. I don't know.
It might take a little while. So
I know.
Okay, if maybe we could do, so one of the pieces that we didn't really get a chance to talk about, and there's millions. So there's millions, so it'll take forever. But one of the really cool things about the Enneagram is that 9 types, 9 energies, 9 motivations, right? And you can break them into different triads. So different groups of 3s. And so we could break down the Enneagram in different ways. So there are, for example, the head-centered types, the heart-centered types, and the body-centered types.
Cool.
Okay. So you can break it down that way. Another way you can break it down is you can break it down as go-getter type. So like that extroverted, high energy kind of feel, the more withdrawn or more, you could say, reserved types. Right. And then finally, you can also break them down into the more service-oriented / dutiful types. And so if it's okay, perhaps we could do it that way. And so
I would love to. Of course, that's okay. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So we'll start off with the go-getters. So the go-getter types, one of the things that just to kind of help them, and I personally try to practice this. I forget constantly, but I really try to practice this, is to pause when they are in conversations.
Oh, that's a good tip. I'm taking that one back with me.
Right? To pause in conversations. This just happened to me this morning. I was in conversation with my husband and I immediately jumped to a conclusion because I didn't let him finish his sentence.
I do that all the time.
Right? I mean, this constantly happens to me. And then with that, if you wanted like an additional kind of piece to it, while you're pausing, just reflect on perhaps the urge of you wanting to speak, and see if you can filter it through the lenses of, is this truthful, beneficial, and pleasing?
Ooh, I love that.
Right. Just
Beautiful.
filter it. And also with that, you can see like, and am I just wanting to talk for the sake of hearing my own voice? Or is this actually contributing?
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Right. Because for us go-getter type people, like our minds are racing a mile a minute, and there's just like, and you can feel it in the energy, right? You get two go-getters in a room and they're essentially talking over each other most of the time, and everyone, and they're fine, you know, like no problem. They're barely even noticing the other is interrupting the other. But this is really important because we don't just interact with our own kind of energetic type. We also interact with like those who really offer space, those who really pay attention. And when you cut them off, that affects them.
Mm-hmm. It totally does. And you know, it's interesting that you say that because, so, I mean, I've been doing this podcast for a couple of years now. And when I first started interviewing people, I'm very much like that. And it's not because I'm trying to interrupt somebody to cut them off, but I'm just so excited about what they're saying that I want to join in, like with my own perspective or my own story. So for so long, I would edit my podcast and I'd listen back and I was like, oh my God. I had to like split up me talking over the other person. And I was like, this is like so embarrassing. I'm like, why am I just like plowing through the conversation? So now what I do is yes, it's exactly what I do. I actually like pause and I nod my head a lot and I smile. And then I think about like in my head, I'm like, this is so good. Yes, yes, yes. Instead of being like, Vrin, this is so good. Like, let me just interrupt your whole thought. Anyway, so that's really interesting. I love that.
Yeah. And so if you do that, you know, something, and perhaps other listeners do that as well. Awesome. You know, add the challenge of truthful, beneficial, and pleasing, right? Add that on.
It's perfect.
See if you can do that. So I would suggest that for the go-getters. For the withdrawns, or perhaps more reserved, often they can be either in their heads or in their emotions, depending on the type. And one of the things that can be really, really helpful, and so I'll also put the caveat, these three kind of tips that I'm offering, applicable to all types, 100%, right? But just maybe a little bit more applicable to certain types than others. That's all. So get into your body. So important. We forget that we have a body, and this is one of the beautiful pieces to the Enneagram, right? You have head center types, heart center types, body center types, and each, depending on the type you are, you tend to lean more heavily into one of those three. Now, growth means you equalize all three into like a triangle, right? You need head, body, heart.
Right.
Right. And so get into your body, because that's the one that most of us forget about the most, right? So whether it's 10 jumping jacks or just putting your feet on the ground and breathing and just being with your breath, anything that will help you get into your body, that instantly energizes and takes you out of whatever feeling of just being more kind of pulled back.
I love that.
So that's one thing. And then the last one I would say for the more service-centered or dutiful types is, it can be easy to lose yourself when you're built that way. And so to journal and to actually to write down, what is it that maybe I need or I want, or even more, I would say, what is my motivation for really wanting to serve here right now? Can be very powerful, because it can be so easy to forget yourself, and it can just be all about the other. It's true. To kind of tune back in and to say, even if I don't know what I need, what is motivating me now? Is it a sense of, oh, well, like this is a piece of my identity, or this is my way of connecting with somebody, or perhaps this is my way of like even like teaching or correcting somebody.
Very, very cool. I love those three. Those are some really great tips. Yeah, I absolutely love that. So I guess these would be like the three types that would fit into like head, body, heart.
No. So head, body, heart puts it into different categories.
Okay.
Go-getters, beautifuls, withdrawn, different categories. And it's
Okay.
so interesting because like even in terms of communication styles, 333 different triads. It's amazing how it breaks down, and they're all within different groups. So it's not like all the heart center types behave the exact same way. They all behave differently.
True. Very true. That's
Yeah.
very true. And they're also intertwined. Everything is so interchangeable. Oh, I love this. This is such a cool concept. Vrin, where could people go to like just do a test on like, do you have a preferred website that people can do a test and find their type?
You know, honestly, I'm a little anti-test.
Fair.
So, I mean, there are websites, and I'll explain also why I'm slightly anti-test. The reason for that is that, so two things. One, many tests, I can't say all because I haven't looked into all of them, but many of them are based on behavior. And so choose how would you show up? What would you do? And then that takes away from like that additional layer of, like you mentioned, perhaps, you're an Enneagram 3 with a wing 4. So that means that you probably experience both extrovertedness and introvertedness,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's what kind of happens then if you're just kind of having to pick and choose, and then you feel like, but it depends on the situation. I might choose all of them. And so
Yeah.
it kind of puts you into a little bit of a bucket. There's also social desirability bias when you do these tests. Oh, I really want to be seen this way. It's so unconscious, so unconscious. I want to be seen this way. It may not be how I actually show up if I really think about it, but this is the way I want to be seen. And the last piece, which, somebody mentioned to me, which I thought was so funny. It's like, you need to be so self-aware in order to do these tests. And the crazy thing is and especially with the Enneagram helps you to build self-awareness. And so you're taking a test which already requires you to be where you're not, if that makes sense.
Fair. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Those are all very valid points. Because if I think back to when I did take all of the tests that I did, I've done them a couple times. You sit there and you're like, oh, like the answer would depend on the day and the situation and,
Exactly.
what phase of life I'm in. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's all so different. Like what's the situation? What's the actual context? So it makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. So really, I feel like, yeah, sitting down, having a conversation, that's really the best way.
That's really
really
good.
the best way.
It's really good. So this is my last question for you, and it's a question that I ask all my guests when they come on the show. It's how can someone create a little more happiness in their day every day, starting today?
What a great question.
Thank you.
So this isn't so much Enneagram related, but this is the first thing that comes to mind for me. The best way that I would say to create happiness every day is to take some time to actually connect with the fact that you're spirit.
Ooh, that's a great one.
Right. And the reason why I say this is that like the yoga texts say, right, one of the essential inherent characteristics of the soul or of spirit is that bliss, happiness, it's already there, right? All of the other things are just layers of conditionings that prevent us from actually being able to access that. And so to just, even the simple fact to remember, wow, I am a spiritual being having a human experience, that this body isn't actually who I am. It is a gift, it's a vehicle, but actually who I am is actually this very blissful spirit.
Oh my goodness. That's so beautiful. I feel so much more aligned after talking to you.
Oh, that's
That's
so
a
kind.
beautiful gift that you have. I love that. Thank you so much, Vrin, for coming on the show. And can you share with our listeners where they can find you so they can learn more about you? I know they're going to want to, so.
Well, thank you. This has been such a heart nourishing conversation. Let me put it that way. I love talking about the Enneagram. But I love talking about the Enneagram in the context of what its real purpose is, which is spirituality, you know, and to recognize that we're spiritual beings. So one way people can find me, I kind of just only focus on one social media outlet. I'm old and don't have the bandwidth for others. So, honestly. So I'm on Instagram. You can follow me at illuminate.nyc, ILLUMINATE.nyc. You can also find out some more information on my website. It's www.illuminate.nyc. I share there. And if anybody is interested to know more about the Enneagram or perhaps do an Enneagram consultation, we'll be happy to be of service if that could be of help. And and if you just want to kind of stay in contact, I created this daily intention setting template just because I felt like, wow, intention setting is just prominent in so many different places. And please forgive me, I think my daughter is going to barge through the door, which she just did.
That's okay. I love it. I love it so much.
This is my life.
How old is she?
What? She's 17 months old.
Oh, honestly, this is the way of the world now. It's the reality. Like, what do you do?
And this is life, you know, and if you had asked me maybe 5 years ago, I would have felt so embarrassed and been like, oh my God. But now it's just like, no, you know what? I'm a mom. I'm so grateful to be a mom. So.
Exactly. And I have so many moms who listen to this show. And so this exact portion is everyone's relatable daily life. Like, you know what I mean? Everyone's like, all the calls that I was probably on today. Yep. It just is.
Yeah, this happens during my coaching sessions, during my husband's coaching sessions, like bargain, and then say something really cute like banana. So anyways, I digress. I love it. So intention setting template. So I just created this because from my own experience of setting intentions and never like manifesting them, honestly. So this just kind of has some guidance and some tools and some tidbits from different teachers that I've learned from and from my own experiences. And so it's a free template and you'll be added to my mailing list. So if you'd like, you can feel free to download that. And if you are interested in meditation, I am going to be putting together something on Enneagram and meditations. And so if you would like to just be in the loop about that and find out more about that, I'll also provide the link so you can just,
I love that. Well, you can just add me to your list because I want to keep up. I love that. I'm definitely going to be signing up for the intention setting journal. That sounds so cool. I love that. That's a great idea.
Oh, I really hope that it's helpful to you and to anybody because, oh my God, you know, when people are like, you can manifest anything. I'm like, you can't manifest anything if you're like totally out to space, you know, it has to be like actionable and like to where you're at. And especially for like all the moms out there, you know what I'm talking about. You know.
I'm not a mom, but I feel like I can relate to this.
Or if you're a mom in another way, like you're an entrepreneur or you're, you know, like we're all moms. We're all kind of like birthing something or growing something in our lives.
It's so true. It's so true. Except you have, you know, tiny humans that you actually need your love and care. And maybe need some attention. I don't know.
Some people have like pets and dogs and cats and so many, you know. Yeah.
True. So true. Thank you so much, Vrin, for coming on to the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was just so thoughtful and just, like I mentioned, just really heart fulfilling.
It really was. It honestly was. And so I really hope everyone who's listening today, I hope that you take all of the beautiful, beautiful wisdom that is packed in this episode and apply it to your daily life. Get in contact with Vrin if you want to learn more. She's here to help and to, you know, help you understand the Enneagram even more. And if you love this episode, share it with someone you know needs to hear this message. And don't forget to rate and review if you enjoyed this episode. I would be so grateful. I really would, honestly. So thank you all so much for tuning in. And remember that happiness happens when you're least expecting it. Well, it looks like we have made it to the end of this episode. I'm so proud of you for tuning into this episode, and I'm so grateful that you joined me in this incredible conversation. I would be so grateful if you took a quick second to rate and review the podcast and let me know what you loved the most. I also love hearing from you, and I would love to know your thoughts on this episode. So feel free to tag me online or let me know that you're listening. I'm so excited to connect with you. Wishing you a beautiful day ahead, and remember that happiness happens when you're least expecting it.